Oof. Hey Jerrin, got the mail. Oh. What's going on? You're looking down over there. What are you talking about, Jerrin? You are home. Man, I'm sorry I didn't realize that you felt that way. What can I do to help you? Huh? What's that? The RPG Travel Zine. Is this one yours, Jerrin?
Tired of the real world stresses in life? Take a trip to one of our fantastic RPG destinations. Oh, this sounds interesting. That looks pretty cool too.
Sounds like this might be exactly what you're looking for, man. Wanna take a look?
What about New York?
Nah, I'm not talking about that New York City. Does that New York City have bloodthirsty mutants run wild, people spontaneously combusting into flames, and the entire city thrown in turmoil at the hands of a woman possessed by an evolved and vengeful mitochondria? No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't really watch the news that often there, so I guess that... Nah. No, I'm not talking about that New York City. I'm talking about the New York City of Parasite Eve for the PlayStation 1.
Welcome to Christmas time in New York. The holiday season, a time of joy and laughter, when you come together with friends and family, and all your troubles seem to just melt away. Some people tend to take the holidays more seriously than others. While it may take place in the holiday season, Parasite Eve is anything but what you'd expect from a Christmas story. The game tells the story of our heroine, Brea, a rookie cop with the NYPD, who, after a seemingly innocent trip to the opera, finds herself entangled in a plot of science gone mad, which will leave her questioning everything she's ever known, especially about herself.
Parasite Eve is a blend of RPG and survival horror gaming greatness that was developed by Square Enix, well, back then known as Squaresoft. The game was released for the PlayStation 1 in 1998, March for Japan, and September for the United States. However, the game that we're discussing here, Parasite Eve, is actually the second story in the Parasite Eve series.
The story that comes first is a novel written by Hideaki Senna, also titled Parasite Eve, telling a very similar story to the game, but taking place in Japan rather than New York. The book was also made into a live-action film, which follows the same story, with only slight changes that I'm aware of. Both the novel and film are available for those outside of Japan that are interested, with the novel getting an English translation in 2005, and the movie has been available on DVD for some time with English subtitles. And at the time of this review, the entire movie was watchable on YouTube, so it should be easy to find with a quick search.
And with all that said, I personally recommend playing through the game first. Even though the book and the movie come first chronologically, there are clear parallels between the two stories that I feel are revealed better over the course of the game. And seeing as how this is a video game review, I'm guessing it's probably the preferred method that you all would like to experience the story as well. And speaking of the story, let's go ahead and dive right into the plot of Parasite Eve.
The game opens up with Aya on a date at the famous Carnegie Hall. They arrive just in time as the opera has only begun. I personally am not a lover of the opera, but beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and after the main actress of the opera locks eyes with our heroine, we can see that something is right here, and that things are about to heat up. Without warning, the other actors on stage, as well as members of the audience, burst into flames, seemingly a case of spontaneous combustion. All this while the actress on stage continues to sing her haunting melody. Get used to hearing this, by the way. Meanwhile, Aya, strangely unaffected by whatever force has taken hold of the rest of the people, stands armed and ready to confront this mysterious woman. Ever the prepared police officer, Aya comes ready with her firearm at her side, even on a date to the opera. After a brief standoff, the woman flees, leaving Aya to give chase. Running through the corridors of Carnegie Hall, we learn that the actress responsible is named Melissa, and that her powers have some very strange effects on the creatures in the area. When Aya does catch up to Melissa, she oddly introduces herself as not Melissa, but instead Eve. Melissa's body begins to mutate before your very eyes as we see that Eve has taken over. Eve declares that the mitochondria, a term that you'll hear very often in this game, will take their rightful place in the world and overthrow the humans as the dominant force of the planet. The rest of the game follows Aya's pursuit of Eve over the course of 6 days. During this time, we will learn more about Eve, the mitochondria, and Aya, whose own past seems to be shrouded in mystery. As I already stated, Aya Brea is a rookie police officer, but you would never guess that watching her over the course of the game. She's an incredibly strong hero who stands her ground when faced with danger, and with the horrors that Aya goes through, it says a lot that she keeps her wits about her. But that isn't to say she's made of stone. There are times during the game, through the psychological warfare that Eve plays on Aya, you can really see the internal struggle where Aya questions herself. Why is she unaffected by Eve's powers? Will she become like Eve herself? Is she herself a monster? These questions weigh heavily on Aya, as she fears she might harm those closest to her. The end result gives us a heroine who is tough in battle, yet still human and relatable. Aya isn't alone in her struggles, as she has her NYPD pals backing her up every step of the way. Most importantly is her awesome partner, Daniel Dawes, a veteran officer who often takes action first and asks questions later. Although sometimes he should look before he leaps. Other than Aya, Daniel easily gets the most development over the course of the game, as we learn about both his dedication to his job and to his family. The rest of the cast consists of Captain Baker, Aya and Daniel's superior officer, Nix and Warner, fellow detectives but don't really do anything of importance, and Wayne and Torres, who manage the weapons department. Outside of the NYPD, there's also Kunihiko Maeda, who acts as a link between the story of the novel and the story of the game, informing Aya and the player of what he refers to as the Japan incident. To keep the translation as spot on as possible, Square tried to keep the dialogue between all the characters shorter, while still getting the necessary information across to the player. While there are a few spots that could be considered plot dumps, which is hard to avoid in any RPG, most of the conversations were to the point and felt more realistic because of that. Aya and the people she interacts with talk to each other like regular people, and their personalities come through, like Maeda's shyness and his admiration of Aya, and Daniel's quick temper, and his softer side for those he cares about.
Now that's one of the things that really pulls me into Parasite Eve, even through this whole bizarre science fiction horror plot. All the people are given a good amount of depth and character. They all feel real and genuine to me. Like, you could sit there and have a conversation with them. Yeah, I know, right? What?
But any discussion of the characters wouldn't be complete without talking about our antagonist, Eve. In my opinion, Eve is one of the best villains of the PS1 era. The mind games that she plays with Aya, and technically the player, keep the intrigue and suspense building over the course of the game. And as she strings Aya and her colleagues along, Eve continually stays one step ahead of them, and pushes her own secret agendas forward. And believe me, when push comes to shove, Eve doesn't hesitate to give a show of her awesome power, laying waste to anyone who stands in her way, aside from our mysteriously immune heroine. Combat is one of the places where I feel Parasite Eve improves upon the usual RPG formula. It's a mixture of action and turn-based RPG styles. Borrowing the active time bar from Square's Final Fantasy series, you have a set amount of time before Aya is able to take action. During this time, you're able to move around the battle area, positioning yourself to strike enemies or avoiding their attacks. This style keeps you on your toes and gets you to strategize each of your turns before acting. For example, you could fire off a couple of rounds immediately when your turn comes up, but after you accept the action, Aya will stop in her tracks. This can leave you vulnerable to enemy attacks, so sometimes it's best to wait for the enemy to strike first, giving you a chance to dodge and then counterattack. Also, there are no random battles in this game. While enemies do not appear on the screen, Parasite Eve's battle system functions similarly to Chrono Trigger. You will go into a battle mode after passing certain spots in the game, which I like to refer to as hotspots. Some of these hotspots can be avoided, but some you just have to fight your way through. But don't stress over fighting them too much, because once you clear a hotspot, that enemy encounter won't respawn unless you leave the room. Also from my experience, respawns will occur less and less each time a particular area is cleared out. Once you do hit one of these hotspots, you aren't taken to a separate battle screen, but rather the enemies appear in the area that you are standing. This again reminds me of Chrono Trigger's battle system. This can be a bad thing, however, as some of the areas you are fighting in can be a bit narrow, which can make it more difficult to dodge oncoming attacks. One more thing to mention about dodging. Aya moves very slowly. For a young cop, you'd think that she'd move less like an old man power walking. One of the worst spots I felt suffered from this issue was the boss fight at the end of day 1. Some of those attacks are nearly impossible to dodge, because Aya just doesn't move as quickly as she should. This problem does become less of an issue later in the game, as your weapons improve and have a larger range, thus allowing you to stay farther away from your targets. This still doesn't help traversing areas outside of combat though. This can cause some groans when you have to backtrack to certain areas, where enemy hotspots don't repopulate very often, leaving you to just watch Aya leisurely stroll from point A to point B. Another issue I have with exploring New York is interacting with objects. There are a number of background objects which you can inspect, and may contain items for you to use. However, it's difficult to tell which parts of the pre-rendered background you are able to interact with. I've had multiple times where I was forced to walk back and forth trying to check something, but apparently was just missing that sweet spot to make it work properly. What makes this even worse is some of these items are necessary to continue the game. They can be very easy to miss, and even knowing where they are, it can take multiple times checking the same drawer or locker to get it to open. Some chests will also blend into the background and be very hard to see, but you want to keep your eyes open, because you'll never know when the next shiny gun or piece of armor will pop up. New weapons in Parasite Eve are what you'd expect an NYPD officer to have, with a couple exceptions. Aya has a vast array of handguns, rifles, shotguns, and more at her disposal to battle against the mitochondrial threat. And she also has a variety of vests and body armor to protect herself. Although this does lead me to question ever visiting some of these places in New York myself. Why is there a handgun backstage at Carnegie Hall? What kind of opera was this supposed to be again? Parasite Eve has a very unique mechanic where you can upgrade all the weapons and armor you have come across during the game with the use of tools. So you can pass some of the stats, being firepower, range, and bullet capacity, from your old weapon to your new gun. But this is at the price of scrapping your old firearm. So be sure you're ready to part with an old piece of equipment before using the tool. Along with stat bonuses, certain equipment also has bonus effects that can be passed on. I admit that this was one of my favorite parts of the game, upgrading my equipment to near unbeatable levels. I also wanted to mention that even though there is a plethora of guns, there are only two types of ammo you'll come across, bullets and rockets. The former is what you'll be using most often, and even though this does remind me of the survival horror staple of watching your ammo consumption, I never once ran out of bullets, so don't let it worry you too much. Here's a quick tip. While chasing after Eve at the very beginning of the game, you'll come to a part where you hear sirens outside. Choose not to follow Eve and instead head outside Carnegie Hall. Here, you can get bandaged up if you need it, and you can talk to this officer, who will give you 60 rounds of ammo for your gun. Do this, and you shouldn't have to worry about your ammo for the rest of the game. Aya doesn't just have a gun to protect herself. As you gain levels, Aya's own mitochondria begins to evolve, giving her powerful magic abilities. These abilities range from healing your hit points to dealing out massive damage to your foes. They use up Aya's Parasite Energy, or PE, which is Parasite Eve's answer to magic points of, say, Final Fantasy. And while you don't have any potions or items that instantly refill your PE, the gauge will gradually replenish itself over time. But be warned that repeated use of Aya's magic will slow your PE's refill rate to a crawl. Personally, I never felt this was much of an issue, as most fights will come to an end before you have to worry about it. However, if you're too reliant on magic, this might be something to keep in mind. I felt the magic system overall was nice for some of the boss fights and for the healing ability, but otherwise wasn't as useful as it could have been throughout the rest of the game.
For when it was released, Parasite Eve was pretty graphically impressive. It was actually boasted as a cinematic RPG. Squaresoft felt so confident with the statement that they actually put it right on the back of their box there. So, now, by today's standards, it might not be stunning, but I think that it still holds up quite well.
The game's graphics remind me a lot of Resident Evil 2, which was released the same year. Much like the Resident Evil series, the game utilizes 3D models over pre-rendered 2D backgrounds. Parasite Eve stands toe-to-toe with any of the games that use this setup, but where the game really shines are in the cutscenes, which are fantastic for a PS1 era game, and the cutscenes really set the tone for Parasite Eve. Some of them even today are really disturbing to watch, in particular the transformation sequences where various creatures are mutated by Eve's influence. The opening opera scene is also one that stands out and really sets the mood for the rest of the game. Parasite Eve's music was composed by Yoko Shimomura, who would later go on to compose the soundtrack for the Kingdom Hearts series. There are a few tracks which I would consider as standout, including the opening theme, Primal Eyes. Most of the tracks, while I don't feel are extremely memorable alone, I do feel really add to the feeling of the game. The music never distracts from the game, but rather enhances it, and that is how I feel a game's music best serves its purpose. Even if you don't recall each song individually, you are certain to remember the feelings of unease as you explore the twisted version of New York with this chilling soundtrack to accompany it. The visuals, combined with the game's audio, are sure to send a few shivers down your spine. So after you've played through Parasite Eve once, will you want to pick it up again? I can tell you that I've played through this game many times and thoroughly enjoyed it, but I'm a bit biased with my obsession of the genre. Even with that said, there are a few things that push the replayability of Parasite Eve. First, its length. Parasite Eve isn't a very long game. I imagine most people will finish the game in under 15 hours for their first playthrough. The shorter playtime lends itself well to being a game you can pick up and play quickly when you need an RPG fix. Also, Parasite Eve does boast a New Game Plus option, where you carry over one piece of armor and one gun, plus your items in storage except for key items, and start the game again. However, there is one threat looming over you in the form of a bonus dungeon, the Chrysler Building. 77 randomly generated floors, with the game's true final boss waiting at the end. Every 10 floors, an intense boss battle awaits, where you will be rewarded with an elevator key, which will let you return to that floor right away, should you have to leave the building. I feel that this extra dungeon, coupled with the ability to customize weapons and pass them on to subsequent playthroughs, gives Parasite Eve a bit more replay value than similar titles.
In the end, Jerrin and I deem Parasite Eve a must-see vacation destination. If you're a fan of RPGs, survival horror, action games, just about if you're a fan of games in general, I suggest looking into Parasite Eve.
Parasite Eve is a game that's worth anyone's time to play for themselves. While it does have its flaws, they are far outshined by the awesome things that this game brings to the table. I have only scratched the surface on what this game has to offer, but that's only because I don't want to spoil anything for those of you going into this game for the first time. The story is a fantastic piece of science fiction horror, with great characters, interesting twists, and solid action, which mixes together in a must-play experience. If you're looking for a copy of this game, you should be able to find one for pretty cheap. I've seen complete copies on eBay go for as little as $10, although they could go for closer to $20. Sales on Amazon were more in the $20 to $30 range for complete copies. Just keep your eyes open, and you should be able to get a great deal on this game. Parasite Eve is also available on the PlayStation Network, for those who aren't compelled to have a physical copy of the game in their hands.
We want to give a quick thank you to all of you watching here today for joining us on our first video game review. We've had a lot of fun doing this. And be sure to look out for more of these in the future. With our new RPG Travel Zine here, we got a good bit of reading to do in the future, so be sure to look out for more. Until next time, take care everybody.